Franke is an accomplished family medicine physician and healthcare executive with over 20 years of experience in urgent care leadership. He currently serves as the Associate Chief Medical Officer at MD Now Urgent Care, where he enhances patient care and operational efficiency across more than 100 clinics. Welcome to DX the podcast, Curtis.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're excited to talk today about just all the work that you do as a leader. 20 years, a lot of experience, and I'm just excited to dive in.
A lot has changed in 20 years,
yes,
right?
Yes, it has. So we're going to actually start with an anecdote. You know, you and I talked a little bit before the podcast. So we were chatting, and you gave a really crystal clear example of kind of the dyad of operations and clinical leadership. And one of those things you talked about was kind of just like the common issue of, you know, a provider arrives late to work versus a provider is having a clinical, you know, issue that needs to be reviewed with a clinician. And so I think this really highlighted that intersection of, you know, clinical leadership, operational leadership, and thinking about that, how do you foster this kind of dynamic but sometimes complex relationship between these leaders and then leading the clinic? So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because you have these clinicians that have trained for years and years and years.
Yes.
You have operational folks as well. And trying to figure out that overlap, I think, is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think some folks do it better than others. Mm-hmm. But there's such a great chance here for your operators to help with the clinical side.
Yeah.
And so I think what we were talking about was the idea that you need a clinical leader to address a behavioral problem of an employee. Right. So our culture fully expect a manager to say, hey, I noticed you were late. Is there something I can help you with? Mm-hmm. Is there something going on? Mm-hmm. And if somebody says, hey, Dr. X sure does write a lot of a certain prescription.
Right. That's clinical.
That comes to me.
That's different.
Right.
Yeah.
That comes to our team. And then we kind of hash that out. But I think there's a huge opportunity to think about how your operational leaders and clinical leaders can overlap and then kind of tackle that. Because I was thinking about this as we were talking, you know, in an organization, the operational team is maybe 70-30. To clinical.
Yeah.
So you have a huge opportunity of all these folks that can help you.
Yeah.
You know, in our organization, I have a great COO, Tina Miller, and then an AVP of Ops who's stellar, Julianne Thomas, who problem solves and helps and does that. And the overlap there of what we're able to accomplish as a whole using our whole squad instead of this diluted clinical leadership only is really kind of nice. So I'm really proud of that.
Well, and you think about the key qualities that each of those leaders have and just the background and the knowledge they have, and really leaning into the importance of let's focus on the knowledge and the qualities that you have as a clinician, because a lot of our clinical leaders are also double dipping, right? They're clinically seeing patients.
That's right.
And then they're trying to manage all of these other logistical things. And really what they love to do and what they want to do is dive into the clinical side of their leadership role, not some of those very operationally focused ones. So I love kind of really pinpointing what are we best at, and let's all excel at what we're best at, and then bring that leadership dyad together to make sure as a whole we're operating well, we're clinically sound in what we're doing.
Yeah. I think, you know, the clinical leaders, it's interesting, have such a huge piece to play in the business space.
Oh, yeah.
They can advise, they can counsel, they can talk about pros and cons and risk, which I think is really great. And I think that clinical leaders should be used more that way.
Yes.
Right? We're not just here for our degree.
Right.
But the other part is also true, right? And I've had operators before who have said, well, I'm not a doctor, which is kind, being deferential.
Yeah.
But imagine if I said, well, I don't do business.
Right.
Right? Like no one would go for that. They'd say, wait a minute. And so of course they do, because they've been a patient, they've been to healthcare, they know what patients want. So they speak healthcare, right? They might not be a doctor, but they speak healthcare. And I think trying to figure out where that overlap happens so that you have more eyes and more people focusing on that really makes a difference.
So all in on the same team and
That's
maybe
right.
bringing their own perspective to the table. So a lot of what you talked about was kind of this internal employee enablement. So more about kind of bringing, employees and staff to the level of fully understanding what are we all in on, what are we moving towards, what are we striving towards. We even see this happening within Fortune 500 companies, right? That they're really focusing on how do we get our employees aligned and focused on the same goals. So we talked a little bit about the term change champions. If you could kind of elaborate on that, I'd love to hear more about how you're kind of making that happen.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think when you're trying to enact change, you have to have somebody who owns it. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of people who participate in the change. You have to have somebody who says, this is mine, and I want to do it. Yeah. And so it might be me, it might be someone on the team, it might be an operator. And so I think you have to kind of identify that person and say, love to see it. Yeah. Let's go. Yeah. Which is great. But the interesting part to me is breaking down where that information stops. Yeah. So for example, when we're doing a quality metric, we want to accomplish decrease in inappropriate antibiotic prescribing. I think everybody wants to do that. Yeah. Everyone in the building should know that.
Yes.
The front desk should know that. The MA should know that. The managers should know that. The area managers, the directors, me, like the entire crew should understand that. But more importantly, we should tell them, right? So if you say, hey, we've been trying to do this, and because of all of your stellar work, you can do that. I mean, I think about, equipping the front desk if someone calls and says, can I just come in and get a Z-Pack?
Oh gosh, that poor front desk person.
I mean, think about the variety of answers they might give, right? And I shudder to think, but I would like to think we've equipped them to say, we were happy to evaluate you, and if antibiotic is appropriate, we will absolutely prescribe it for you, right? So easy, but when you share that and say, this is why it's important. But the other part too is I think it engages that whole team, right? Because we're not just doing paperwork, we're taking care of humans. And when you bring it back to that and say, this is what we're trying to accomplish, here's why it's important, then you can do that. But you've got to have that change champion to say, this is my project.
And I love thinking about every piece of the patient journey, right? It's more than just the clinician that sees the patient, writes the prescription. It's the check-in, it's the rooming process, it's the provider seeing the patient, it's maybe when they're leaving and checking out at the front desk, it could be that they go to get an x-ray, it could be that they go to get a lab drawn. All of those people having engagement in that big goal as an organization could just absolutely change the trajectory of that patient's mindset for that visit, their understanding about their healthcare. And it's, I think, a very revolutionary way to think about it, because oftentimes we kind of pinpoint just, okay, that interaction with the provider, whether or not they prescribe the antibiotic is the end all be all. And that's just not true, right? It's, again, the intersection of operations and clinical medicine. So I love that. It's very, very cool. So a lot of what you talked about was awareness building, and so awareness across the entire organization. So tell me why this is maybe also important kind of external to your clinic. So external of like the patient visit, maybe you have partners or others that you are, connecting with in terms of healthcare, right? The patient doesn't just see patients or people within your four walls. So understanding how to make it known that the care that you're giving is quality care. Tell me a little bit about how that, impacts the overall business of urgent care, right? How are you known by others in the healthcare world, so to speak? And how does that overall impact kind of what you're doing every day?
I talked to a lot of folks at UCA about this. I would love to shout from the rooftops the quality work we're doing. Because I think that there are some urgent cares that have quality metrics that they can prove out what they're doing. And I think there's some that are maybe in the beginning stages. But, we have reduced our inappropriate antibiotic prescribing by 50% over the past few years. We have a steroid stewardship program where we want to make sure that we're prescribing them appropriately for our patients, which is a big deal in urgent care.
I mean, kind of a forgotten deal, actually.
And steroids are not benign drugs. I think about my rheumatologist who trained me back in the day who always used to say that. I mean, they're needed, but you have to be careful. And so I think understanding that is really important. And so sharing that information far and wide. So we do it internally. We started to share, in our monthly quality calls, our managers come and we go over those metrics. Here's what we have, here's what we're doing. But we talk about it with our partners because I want them to know when they come to see us that we're going to take care of them using evidence-based medicine and make sure they get the best care possible in the interim, whether they go back to a PCP or they stay with us, whatever might happen. But that's really important to share because I think that's part of the awareness campaign of urgent care. That this is real medicine done based on evidence, and it can be done really well.
And so you're building trust at every level then. You've started to build that trust with the patient, even at the front desk, even at the phone call, right? And then along the patient journey within your four walls, and then extending that trust beyond the four walls with those partners that you have in the healthcare field.
Exactly.
So, very cool. All right. Well, overall, you've had the opportunity to lead within several contexts of the urgent care industry over these 20 years. What is maybe a common thread that you can encourage urgent care leaders to consider or think about whenever they are personally looking to affect change within their organization?
It's funny when we prep for this or talked about it, I was thinking, like, what do I want to leave with? And I think about this a lot for clinical leaders, is that I think you have to go back to the purpose of what we're doing. So in our organization, we're going to see thousands a day, millions of patients a year, and that is what we do for a living. And I think it's important to remember that every so often, because we talk a lot about throughput, margin, EBITDA, all the things, right? But that is not what we do. That's how we measure how we're doing it. But what we do is we take care of people for a living. And so I think when you bring that back down, if you think about retention and engagement and sense of purpose and people wanting to work for an organization, if you go back there, I think people are proud to do it.
Absolutely.
Right. And you have to talk about those things. I'm not dismissing those. Like door-to-door time is critically important in the business. Margins are important or you won't have a business. But I think you have to go go back to the fact that everyone in this building today is trying to take care of someone in their hour of need.
Yeah.
And it's so easily lost because we do it all the time.
Because it's the job that we do.
We talk about numbers and data and whatever, but when you think about it, it's somebody is sick and they say, can you help me today?
Yeah.
And so I think that is really important to drive back to, and I'm hoping that clinical leaders use every chance they can to reset that.
That's incredible. Just getting back to the core.
That's right. We can do that and do all those other things, but let's remember we don't do door time for a living.
Right. What is your guiding light, right? That's awesome. Well, this was really great. Thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge. I know it was just a snippet of what you've learned in these last 20 years, but really grateful for your willingness to be open with what you've learned and what you're doing and how you all are growing. And I hope to hear from you again soon on DX the podcast. I
appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. DX the podcast was born out of the idea that we are ready to diagnose the future of urgent care with the smartest leaders in the industry. Find all the other episodes on Spotify and LinkedIn to keep up with us in this journey.